And also, as part of being a just a working session, the intent was not to have a jabber scribe, okay, in the usual sense. It's really just us here in the room. The only problem is we really do need to plan to speak into a microphone because we do have remote participants, okay? So please try to hand around the microphones. In fact, if we kind of get together, if there's something going on, you can, grab the microphone out of the stand and just pass it in the group. I really want to try to make it convenient to be a working session. So you don't have to line up at the mic. We can pass a mic between each other. And we do have the two here. So if we need to have two and that makes it easier, let's just plan to do that. Okay, we're actually right at 1740 here. So again, this is the Registration Protocols Extensions Working Group. As I said, the intent is to make this a working session, so there are no planned slides except that Roger did have an outline for the topic that he has here in terms of registry mapping, and he sent that to me a little while ago. I'm going to take the time to put that into something that I can display, so I'll get it up on the screen and the remote participants can see it. I'm going to turn this meeting over to Roger to walk through the discussion and make this a working session. I'll try to manage the queue over here so that he doesn't have to be distracted by that. And I'll also try to get the slides. I'll try to keep them to the extent that we're using whatever's on the screen in the outline that he gave me. I'll try to keep the on screen at that place for remote participants so that you can see what we're doing. And with that, let me turn it over to Roger. I'm going to hand out the blue sheets and then I'll take care of getting some slides going. So Roger, over to you.
Thanks, Jim. I think we started talking about this maybe even last year in Chicago when we were trying to find out where to put launch phase details into the fee mapping document. And we decided that it actually didn't belong there. So it was suggested that we actually find a new location for how to define what launch phase information is actually required for a registry or a fee installation. So it was lucky that VeriSign actually had already started this idea some time ago. And Jim actually suggested that we go and take a look at that and see if it works or not. Jim and I have spent, I don't know, last 6 months back and forth probably looking at it and deciding that for the most part, it fills what we were looking for with some slight changes that we've already started making on it. And this idea of the registry mapping is I suppose twofold. It's system level information. So if you're looking for your connections, how many connections you have, the timeouts on the connections and things, you can find that in there. But the purpose that we were really digging into was some of the TLD, more specific information that the registry mapping provides. What host names are allowed, what contacts, what things like that. But taking that one step further, it's also led to an extensible registry mapping where when a new extension comes in, thinking of launch phase and fee, you can actually define those in this registry mapping and how that RFC was actually implemented by the registry for that TLD. So we'll get to those details, but I just wanted to provide that high level item.
May I?
Please.
So just to be fair, he keeps saying Jim, and although I do frequently go by Jim, it's only fair to acknowledge he's talking about Jim Gould here. He's not talking about me every time he says Jim at the moment. So I just wanted to be fair and acknowledge the source of all of that. I should also acknowledge that our co-chair, Antoine Bouchorin, is out there in the remote participation for this meeting. Just wanted to make that known too. Anyway, I'm sorry, so back to you.
Thanks, James. All right, so let's just kind of run through what the current registry mapping kind of looks like. Again, I sort of described it the two main parts are the registry level system items and then TLD specific items, or zones, I think it's called in the registry mapping. So, and again, when you look at the core system items, it's not a lot of not a lot of information, but again, max connections, idle timeouts, absolute time, the command timeouts, those type of items are in that system level. And then when we get into the zone level, this really is about the GTLD and what its parameters are set inside the SRS. So when you get into the zone level, you're talking about what services are available for that TLD, deployment groups, management information, like create and update dates, the create and update clients. Other items are like batch jobs, shared object zones. So if there's certain things that get shared across one GTLD to the other, maybe you can share a contact from one to the other. So you can use one contact and you can put it in multiple different, or use it in multiple TLDs. Let's see, domain policies, obviously, and under that, the domain name rules, the rules around IDNs, the domain contact, what those rules are, name servers, child hosts, registration periods, RGB periods, DNSSEC, domain check policy, and what the supported statuses are, any rules around the auth info, expiry policies. And again, these are all within the main core of a zone definition for a TLD. So moving on from the domain policies, get into the host policies. What are the policies around internal host, external host? Can you share the IPs, items like that? Host check policy, host naming rules, and again, the supported statuses for the host as well. Moving on, we have the contact object as well. What rules are around the contact identifier? And again, any sharing policies on contacts, how they can be shared. Postal info rules, contact check policies. So how many checks can you do, or how many contacts can you put in a check? Disclosure support policy. Does the TLD recognize the disclosure flag and won't disclose certain information? Again, supported statuses, and a privacy policy contact support. All right. And that's basically the core of the registry mapping, and the big item that gets attached to this, of course, is the extensions. So when extension is created, we can start to define those in this registry mapping. And Jim Gould actually has already done a preliminary one of launch phase. So he went through the launch phase RFC and pulled out everything that could be configurable off of that RFC. So all the mays and shoulds, all the options, he pulled all those pieces out and said, okay, for a TLD, you need to define these things and how the TLD implemented it. So if you look at the launch phase extension itself, you're talking about policies including at the not at the RFC, but at the phase. So it's kind of an embedded policy where it's, what type of phase is it, the name of the phase, what modes, first come, first serve, pendings, and is it an application or is it an actual registration create? Some other things are the start dates, supported validators, supported launch phase statuses. Are pending creates allowed? Is it the pull messaging policies, supported mark validation methods? Actually, Jim just mentioned to me that, there's multiples in there. I never thought about it. There's multiples in there. So, yep, please.
So sorry for the interruption. Anyone have the magic HDMI to Mac adapters? I did not pick one up from the registration desk. I didn't realize they don't have the dongles. If nobody does, I could go to the desk and get it, but I think I'll just stay for this. I did upload the document that he gave me with the outline that he's reading from here into the meeting materials. So you could go to the meeting materials for this meeting and you'll find the outline of discussion up there. Let me see if Aubrey is able to help me here. Sorry, back to you.
Thanks. And really, again, he went through all these and just went through it item by item and pulled out all the mays and shoulds. So probably one of the big things to talk about is this policy concept of when a extension is created, we all sit here and talk about it and design it, and everybody has to add, one or two pieces to it. But that implementation is not that you always have to do those things. We went through the fee document, and Jody probably can talk to this better than me, but when we were implementing fee, 5 years ago, even though the fee document isn't even done, but when we implemented it 5 years ago, every registry that we worked with, we had to sit down with them, and they kept asking us, well, what about this piece of the fee document? Do you need this one? And do you need this one? So we had to go through with every registry and say, we don't use it. I mean, you guys can implement it if you want. The document, makes it optional or whatever. But, we don't implement, we're not going to use it. So we went through this process with, 300 different companies and had to go through and do the same process with them. What this will do actually is provide that information at HTLD. So all 1,200 TLDs that are coming will provide that exact information that we need, that we can do it with, and we don't have to go back and forth and miss one with one registry and pick it up with the next one. So I don't know, Jim, did you have anything you wanted to speak specifically on for an introduction, I guess, and we can get into questions?
Yeah, what I would say is that the experience of being an author of the launch phase extension and then trying to take that and create a policy extension out of it was very worthwhile. I just got to say, as we go through these internet drafts, we keep throwing stuff in. I mean, in essence, you'll see it. You saw it in the registry fee extension. Things are getting thrown in essence, you're going to implement it as a registry the way that you're going to implement it based on the option that you chose. But the point is that in the case of the launch phase policy, there were 15 different mays and shoulds and lists and that sort of thing that was thrown in there. So as an author, really clarified all the things and all the thought that went in there, but it adds to the complexity for the registrar. So in essence, even if you didn't do this extension, you probably want to document it in some place, right? You want to have an artifact that defines exactly how it is that how you implemented a particular extension. But for me personally, I prefer to write it in code than it is to write it in a Word doc that goes to legal. So just my choice, but I think it's worthwhile to go through that exercise anyways as an author of one of these extensions.
That's a good point. I mean, it's something you bring up. I mean, for the fee document, I don't know, it's about 4 years old now, I think, from the original. And, I didn't get heavily involved in it until last year. So there was a lot of things in there already and it's probably doubled in size since, the beginning of last year. So it's all those, I don't know if you call them compromises, but agreements that, yeah, it needs to do this and it should do that. And they need it over there, so let's put it in there, kind of features that just need to be documented somewhere. So I agree, the policy document really pulls that out and probably really helps, when you start to think about true implementation of it. And it's like, oh, yeah, so how do you technically do that then? I mean, everybody agreed that, yeah, it makes sense to do that in the RFC. But, okay, now that we actually have to make it work, how do you make it work? So.
So yeah, one other item is the fact that this would, in essence, result in 2 extensions for every extension.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So just think about this. So if you create an extension around on a registry fee, in essence, by creating a policy extension of the registry object as opposed to an extension of a domain, what you're doing is that by defining the policies of how you're implementing an extension, you're pretty much creating another extension of something different, right? So you may think that it's doubling your work, but to me personally, that it's something that you should be doing anyways. Actually, when I create an extension, I typically will always implement it myself on both sides. I want to understand how it works or how it doesn't work. I look at all the different options, but be able to capture that in something that's concrete that can be consumed by software, I think is really beneficial. So I don't want to start with a negative, the fact that there's 2 extensions instead of just 1. I think it's absolutely necessary.
Okay. That's really the high level overview of what the registry mapping is intended to be. I don't know if anybody has questions, concerns. I mean, I think Jim brought up the biggest concern that, I can see authors having is really it creates 2 documents for every extension that you create. So.
Well, does it have to be 2 documents? It doesn't have to be 2 documents, right? I mean, I guess that's the question you're trying to get on the floor here, right?
Yeah, and it's something that we actually have talked about is, do they need to be 2 separate documents? Can it be a section within one document that explains all this?
Alex Mayer was speaking, like 30 centimeters above ground level. My general impression, I've been reading through the Word document that you posted on the meetings materials, and I think that I know roughly the internals of the domain name registry, but some of the words that you mentioned there, I have no idea what they actually are. So batch jobs is one of the words or points on that Word document. I don't know what I would need to describe there. I understand you created that from that Excel sheet that you sent to most of the registries. Yeah. So it's like a living experience of what you require from registries.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, actually, the batch job was feedback
So
from.
maybe quickly 5 seconds. So I think before we can work on the document, we should actually understand, or at least some of us should understand what each of these items actually are. Unless the extension is so generic, then essentially it's a key value pair that says batch job domain expiration, yes, whatever that means. Yeah, you know what I mean.
I would say that, yeah, we need to agree on the terminology.
Yeah.
I think, number one, I thought that it was, well, I guess in my mind, it was known, but obviously it's not. So just to let you know, the fact is that it's generally something that we're going to run on a schedule. The most important one that we have is the delete batch that runs at a specific time that will actually purge the domains from the system. But the timing of those batches is really important for the registrars to know when, like an auto renew is going to occur, when the domain is going to get deleted, when is a transfer going to get auto approved, when do those batches that run on the schedule execute? That's what that particular section is about. So if you have another term that is better for that, it'd be great to know.
Yeah, and this is Roger. Alex, yeah, I think for the core items, it's definitely not going to be a key value pair. I mean, they're set items, so.
Chris from Core Association. We definitely are supporting this. We've been kind of asking for something like this for 5 years now. Of course, I think the pitfall is always, what if the registries implement this extension differently, right? Then kind of, so we need to be, if we define something, it needs to be strict enough that there is little room for interpretations. The second thing, I think it would be great to have an extension that we can use. For example, you have XML and you can generate a number of test commands that you can send. If you can automatically generate some of your commands, at least some of your commands for registries, that would be extremely helpful to the registrars, because they can just put the case in and take all the data, immediately feed their system, try to connect, see if there's any bugs, etc., run all the test cases, and then immediately they're far further into having this implemented.
Yeah.
We're definitely supportive of any efforts.
Excellent. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I think you make a good point. Again, going along with what Alex said, that core set has got to be something that everybody agrees to. And then again, maybe not everybody implemented every one of those items, but agree that that's what that is and that's what it's for.
You're too kind.
Oh, come up here, Scott. This one's a little higher.
No, this is okay. Scott Hollenbeck. In terms of the question of do we do this in 2 documents or do we do it in 1, I've got a very strong preference for trying to find a way to do it in 1. It just, from an overhead perspective, makes things much easier. And if that means that we as a group, think a little bit about adopting some kind of a convention for what we might expect to see in terms of a section, in an extension document that addresses this, that would be time well spent.
Thanks, Scott. This is Roger. We went through this discussion, and one thing we kept coming back to was how complex will that one document get, and will it get confusing when it's talking about mays and coulds and shoulds, and then you get into a section that is detailing all those out. Does that complicate, how that first draft is written? Okay. Any other questions? Online, any questions? No? Does everybody understand, I suppose, the goal here? And is it a good goal? Something that the group would like to move forward with?
You might want to go through some of the questions that we've got.
Yeah, thanks.
Alex here again. Maybe I can try summarizing in a single sentence. The goal is to transport the configuration of a registry and all aspects of that in EPP, between registry and registrar.
That's a good summarization of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Alex does
It's a nice
understand
goal.
it.
Yeah, I understood one of the rows. It's a nice goal. It's a hard one, I guess. Yeah, because there's so many ways to do something in a different way.
Yeah, and again, I think that the core piece of it will probably be the hard part to do, and get everybody agreed that these are the main things everybody does. The extension, adding extensions in is probably pretty easy because it is a little more dynamic. But yeah, I think that the core would be where we'd spend our time trying to get agreement on what that actually means, and does everybody call it that or not? As long as I guess the meaning behind it is known.
Alex again. I try not to be the elephant in the room, but shall we include information regarding privacy policy with regards to what type of data is being published on the other hand as well? Or is that just the provisioning end? So which of the data is going to end up in GUIs? Yeah?
That's interesting. I mean, again, one of the items in EPP was the disclosure flag. So you're starting to touch on it, but is it more?
I would actually try to stay away from that. On the other hand, my question is, would that configuration information be incomplete to you then?
I would respond to that and say that it's around provisioning. If there was an extension, like for example, like you had said, that the disclosure element that outlines, what is possible, that way, how the registry implements that particular feature would be described in this particular extension. So I'm not sure if you want to go beyond that boundary. Yeah.
I think that most registries, at least that I've been talking with in the CCTLD world, might want to go beyond of what's possible with the disclosed flags. Yeah. Some of them might not even display a handle or a contact ID for a domain name holder.
Yeah, part of my concern as well in doing something like this is trying to capture every possible combination of implementations that may be kind of what I would call snowflake kind of one-off, potentially. The issue is that for us to have something that's common across those, I would see that if there are some registries that do things in a very unique way, then maybe want to create a separate extension of this to be able to communicate their particular unique policy. So I wouldn't want to bake this and make it so big to cover every possible little nuance, but.
So what you're saying is that we are going for the 80-20 principle.
Exactly, yes, that's right.
Just to add on to that, Alex, 80-20, where you can still define the 20 just on the side of it. So it's not that we had to agree with the 20 here. It's an extension that you can add into it.
Yeah, since it's an object in EPP, you can create command response extensions for that. So therefore, you can define whatever it is you want, define your policy.
Chris, again, one of the ways maybe to prevent people from writing whatever they want and causing incompatibility is if there's a way that allows you to generate XML. You have an XML definition, and then you can, define the extension. Of course, each registry can define it on their own, and they say, okay, our fee extension is supposed to look like this. Therefore, here is what you should use to generate, for the command create, what you should send to us. So then your system can read it and immediately generate what should be sent. So in a way, it kind of bypasses people. If I write something, key value pairs, for example, okay, someone has to actually look at it and say, okay, we have to implement this and this. But if it's code, it can work out of course. And we prevent the problem of, okay, they define something strange or something uncommon.
Actually, we've already implemented our proprietary version of this, and with 150 plus TLDs, yeah, we have everything data driven to be able to generate the policy. But the intent is to help the registrars to be able to see those variances between those TLDs, so that therefore the registrar can auto-configure their side of things. And we use this ourselves for our own monitors. So knowing what like launch phase particular TLD is in and what can and can't be done is very, very useful. So yeah, it's got to be data driven as much as possible. Good.
All right. We did have a few, I guess, suggestions, questions that have come up since we started talking about this. Anton actually brought up a question. I think the last time we talked on this was, should the key relay mapping RC be included in here? And I think that the easy answer is yes. The hard answer is, is it an extension or is it in the core? And to me, it seems simple enough just to make it part of the extension, leave it out of the core. That's just my opinion, but.
Actually, Anton might be able to describe this. So I'd like to know what options there are in the key relay that you would want to communicate in something like this. It may be just that the TLD supports it. Yes or no. If it's a yes or no, then the core already supports that because it already lists the XML namespaces supported by that particular TLD. So if you connect to a registry that supports 150 TLDs, you're going to see an aggregate of all the different extensions supported by that system. But in essence, you want to be able to query for a particular extension. I mean, it's particular TLD, what is supported. So in essence, if key relay was only supported by a subset of those TLDs on the system, you would be able to identify that. But if there's more than that, then you'd be able to identify those specific options in the key relay that would be useful.
Okay. And actually, Patrick gave us quite a few different, at least talking points to look at. He brought up a few different attributes of zones, the rules around domain names, number and type of objects, and policies on unlinked object relations, which is an interesting one because we've been talking about that for a little while now. As you know, what are the deletion rules around an object that's been sitting there, not associated to anything for a year? Is it, after 6 months you get rid of it? If it's not linked, it's an interesting one that I think could be useful in there. Alex
again. I'm trying to turn my head around the fact that this can actually be depending on other facts. Like, for example, registries can introduce new IDN scripts, which changes that rule. But in turn, registries might want to introduce those IDN scripts in like Sunrise style. So we have like combinations of those things. And I have no idea how we could ever convey that in a machine readable format that would enable you to like press a button and say, .at is enabling Cyrillic, next month and its applications. So it's interesting. So we could either focus on the I like to say the stable operations mode of the registry and try to include like valid from, valid to style things. Or we could go for the venture to actually try and look at whether we can manage to represent those combinations. There will be a launch phase with a UIDN script that creates applications.
I'll respond to that one. Actually, the launch phase is pretty unique in the fact that it has schedules, defined schedules. Something like what you're talking about, I believe that may be better suited where, in essence, there's an updated date for the policy. So the idea is the fact that there's two different forms of getting policy information for what we call the zone. One is to get a list of all the zones, and then there's an updated date in there to be able to support updating your cache on the client. So in essence, if you've loaded it all up, then let's say that we change the IDN policies, which is say, right? And let's say that we're able to encode the IDN policies effectively inside the zone. What you'd be able to do is do a query, find out that it's been updated, then query for the specifics, right? So in essence, what you would be doing is that you would be having the data provided from the response to be able to drive your logic. Instead of saying, I'm going to schedule ahead of time and look at, at this particular date, you'll be able to do it dynamically. In that instance, not in the case of launch phases.
Okay. Another thing Patrick brought up was the EPP transport content, number of connections, which I think is obvious, timeouts. And to me, those were the obvious system ones that we actually had in there. I don't know if they're TLD ones would be specific or not. So registrar content. This was an interesting one. Password policies, lifetime of password. Can you reuse them? Complexity, things like that. Is that something that we could design into this so that it's defined and anytime anybody logs in, they know, hey, the password expires in 30 days. So it's another context that is useful today is obviously fairly manual. we just went through it with Phileas not too long ago. But another good idea, I think. So.
Since this is a working session, I can interrupt so nicely. I have an idea with two things. One thing is I think we should reuse previous work. So I don't know whether there is some XML or whatever that describes a password policy. If such a thing exists, we shouldn't reinvent the wheel. For example, IDN scripts, we should use LGR, because that's already existing, and there are groups actually describing the policies for various scripts. So if possible, we could include LGR here. And the second thing is, since there are so many of those things, we should maybe at one point go through all those things and try to figure easy, not that easy, but doable, hard, very hard, and then decide which of the things we would want to include, the most pressing ones, I would say. If the most pressing ones are the ones that are very hard to do, then we have a problem. If 80% of the most pressing ones are the easy ones, then let's go for the easiest ones first and try to move up from there.
So you're thinking the hardest technically to solve, and balancing that against the cost of how it's currently being done, basically.
Collecting it manually.
Yeah.
On both sides, preferably.
Yeah, what I would be asking for is the other registries specifically out there, take a look at this. A lot of the elements in here make sense to me because, we get VeriSign went ahead and implemented it, so that matches our way of doing things, but ours is not the only way. So it would be great if other registries take a look at this and think about what kind of policies you have on your end that could be communicated to the registrars in a structured way. If you can't, you may want to think about it. I'm just throwing it out there. If you can't represent your policy in a way that's easily consumable, then it may be too complex of a policy, right? But take a look at this and see if it's something that is missing, something that could be adjusted, because the idea here is to be able to come up with one way that registries can do this.
So, Jim Galpin, just speaking for myself here. Since I guess I want to say two things. First, just in response to Jim Gould there immediately, we are carefully looking at this. We Phileas and trying to decide what we want to do here, and we want this to work. This particular registrar content stuff and password policies, not actually sure this belongs here. I think it probably belongs somewhere else. I just don't have an alternative to suggest at the moment. So, with that in mind, it's okay to talk about what this might look like, because even if we move it somewhere else, we will have had the discussion about what this kind of information looks like. And so, I like the fact that we have an opportunity to talk about this line item. And the second thing is, since Roger just mentioned that, they, meaning GoDaddy and us affiliates, we actually tried to go through a password change for all of the registrars that are with us for all of our TLDs, and found that to be, I'll just call it an interesting exercise. So we're very interested in trying to find a way to better manage this kind of information. I'm not sure it belongs in this registry mapping, but at some point it's either going to go here or we'll have a suggestion on a different kind of framework to do that. So I just wanted to put that out there for discussion. Since all of this is just under discussion, it's fine to just take that in for right now.
I'll jump in on that one. Actually, I kind of think that it does belong in this. It may be that warning messages and that sort of thing about expiring password would be more for an extension of the login response or something. But in the case of defining policy, if you're going to, on the registry side, expect a password to be changed every 90 days, right? That would be a basic system level policy that you could communicate to the registrar so their systems are aware of it.
So I guess the distinction that I would make and why this is just sort of a discussion for us is Are we talking about the registry as a service provider so that, I mean, for example, you like us, we have a couple hundred TLDs, so are these policies about that or are they about a TLD? Because on the one hand, it's not clear that these passwords are per TLD, which is what the whole mapping is for, as opposed to that. And I think it's an interesting distinction. And if we're going to come up with a framework to sort of manage these things, we have to decide what that distinction is going to mean and how that would apply to this particular content. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And actually, based on the connection policy and the timeouts and that sort of thing, those are system level. And that was added. So there's a different area for a system, and then the system contains many zones or TLDs. And then you can have specific policies at the TLD level. So it supports both. And in the case of the launch phase, what Roger had referred to is the fact that it's a sub-element of a TLD. So a TLD has many phases. So when you look at the policies of a phase, they're unique per phase. But there's no way that it will limit it in this way. But in essence, what winds up happening is that by having a system level set of policies, have a TLD level policies, and even have the option for sub policies that it can do it.
I think in terms of the password policy, I do think it is actually a good thing, because there is typically in a registrar, there are various people working, of course, and some people manage the relationship with TLDs and some people manage the technical aspects of it. And every time there's something like a password change, it has to go through multiple people until it reaches the responsible person that can actually change the password. If the system can already notify immediately the technical person that there's a change about how the policy changes or something, then that will smooth a lot of things over.
Yeah, one item that we discussed actually today was whether or not this would be strictly policy. Like for example, you could say, yeah, the passwords expire every 90 days. The other is that it could tell you based on your login when your password's going to expire next, based on that request, right? That may be better suited for a separate extension related to telling you proactively that your password is about to expire. But it could be done that. So I'm not sure whether or not that's something that you just put as policy within this extension, then you put the other somewhere else.
So, I mean, I'll complicate this even further. I mean, there are multiple passwords that may or may not apply at different times in all of this, which is part of why we're into this, right? I mean, there's the EPP passwords and the connections there. Registrars have access to portals, on our website, and there are different passwords that go with that. There are multiple role-based passwords that go, and this is why, for us, it's a larger question of an overall framework for dealing with authentication. And whatever we do here just needs to fit into that larger framework. And, that's kind of why I bring it up. I mean, it makes sense, I agree, to a first order, since this is about EPP and you're talking about credentials for EPP, and sure, I don't want to disagree that it should go here. There may or may not be more things to say there. So I'm just observing that we're thinking about it in a larger framework is all, and want to open the door for, there may be something else that this work has to relate to for, for it to make sense.
Well, actually, you bring up a good point now. If this was broader than the actual system, say that, for FTP or whatever other passwords that would be there, I don't think that would be applicable to this. And actually, this is specific to each system. So in essence, if you have multiple registry systems, each registry system would return back the policies of that system and any TLDs on that system. So in essence, if you were looking for a central place to look at all the systems and then all the TLDs within all those systems, then that would be even a bigger problem where, in essence, the broader password issue may apply. But this is kind of targeted per system. So in essence, when a registrar connects to a registry system, this would be targeted for that one system and not talking about a different system. So I'm not sure whether or not there would be a desire to have it be broader than that, but I'm thinking that might be too big.
Right. Well, and then in those lines, if we go down into another layer, so we've sort of casually thrown out the idea that you might tell the tell the client when they log in that their password is about to expire. Well, if we're talking about an EPP client, and this is an EPP server on the other side, there's probably no place for that kind of notification. And notification probably needs a different mechanism to get out there so that the registrar knows, that kind of thing. That's why I'm thinking about a different framework for dealing with credentials, that there's a relationship here, but I'm not sure that all the details are in here or not.
No, I'm actually with you on this one. So I would say put the policy in here, but things like warnings about expiry of passwords, expiry of certificates, expiry of or insecure Cipher suites, and that sort of thing could be an extension or a login security extension or whatever it is that would provide additional information in the login response, which would be more useful and more real time than it is taking a look at policy of that system. I think that's my.
Right. So I agree. Thanks. And just a time check, 15 minutes.
Thank you. Okay. Any further questions, comments? Chris is coming up.
In terms of notifications,
Yes, all the way into the mic. Because we
so
got
the poll messages can already be used to send some sort of notification. First, does the system of the registrar recognize what this poll message is? That's a whole other story. But if we want to send something live, I would say it doesn't make sense to make an extension since this already exists. And I know that lots of registries are sending somewhat of this type of poll message, not exactly a notification of the password, but things that are not within the spectrum of what is typically there.
So Jim Calvin, Jim Gould will come up next just to say, I mean, poll messages are interesting because, and I'm sure that Jim Gould would say something similar, registrars' willingness to actually react and take on board poll messages varies quite broadly, shall we say. I mean, I think, as a registry, and we're very much in favor of trying to migrate more things to poll messages as opposed to individual email messages and other kinds of things, because there's greater opportunity for automation and a little more stability and standardization in it. But I think the problem that we have is we kind of have to do that a little bit at a time, would be what I'd say, because not all registrars are the same. They don't all react to the poll messages. So we have to begin to figure out how to get traction in the parsing of poll messages and get more registrars on board with doing the right thing. And that's a real problem for us, especially with smaller registrars. I mean, GoDaddy obviously is not a problem in that respect, but there are many that are. So.
Yeah, actually, what I would say is that I equate the poll queue to email. So in essence, imagine that a client is on your website and they have to change their password. You probably tell them right there on your web page, then send an email. So I think it would be better if you're able to return the information right within the response to the login, because that way what you can do is provide additional information related to that particular connection, like I said, whether or not your certs are going to expire, whether or not the Cipher suites are insecure, those sorts of things could be returned. But again, I don't think that's related to the registry mapping, because I think that's policy.
Calfire, some of this material relates to actually connecting to the registry in the first place. How do we bootstrap this? How do you communicate a password policy before you have a password? How do you communicate certificate information or Cipher suites before you've connected to the registry in the first place?
Thanks, Cal. Were you talking to Jody? Because I think he brought this up before as well. Yeah, that's a good question as to how you can do that. Because one of the biggest problems that registrars have is really onboarding the TLD. So by the time we get a password into this system, we've answered the 500 questions that we needed answered. So it is something that we need to look at and figure out how, where does that information set? Can you get an OT&E that describes the production system? I don't know. It's something that we've been throwing back and forth at how we can do that. So good question.
And I'll tell you that, we've thought about this issue ourselves because we'd very much like to do something like this. I mean, this would just be a super thing, and I'm sure that you guys would think of it the same way. And that is an issue. I mean, there's a certain manual process associated with onboarding a registrar, and what you want to do is find a way to get to a point where you can set them up so they can just go do this and get it automated. And at what point does where is that point in time in all of the set of manual things that you do? And we haven't decided that yet. So, but that is a discussion we have to have, and we're hoping to bring, we'll give that some thought and decide what we think, and we should have some discussion. Maybe it isn't really clear if we're going to try to standardize that point in time or not, or if that'll be left for individual registries to decide. But it would be a good point of discussion at some point.
This is a crazy idea because I was just saying I hate Word documents, but I think honestly this is consumable definition. So in essence, whether or not you were to formally define it in a structure like this and put it into an artifact that then could be slurped in and then used to configure, you could do it in batch instead of doing it real time. Not that I'm suggesting it that way, but it's consumable, right?
So a related idea about this is what happens when this changes, if the policy changes over time. You'd really like to set up an automated way to alert registrars that there's been a change and they should go grab it again. Or should they just grab it each time? And there's a policy for that.
Yes, that was the purpose of the updated date, honestly. Yeah. So the point is that you would expect the registrar to be able to periodically query efficiently, which provides a list, not all the detail, with an updated date, and they see that it's been changed. I would anticipate that the registrars would cache it on their end. So you see it's changed, then you can go and query and reset your configuration. Right. So.
No, that's actually a good point. And how do you announce that change is upcoming as well? Jody, go ahead. Your mouth is moving, but we cannot hear you.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes. Nice and loud.
Sorry about that. Yeah, one of the options would be to be able to add this to be updated, add an attribute in there to say that the registry mapping will be updated at this time for this TLD. Just a thought in case if it's going to be updated in 3 days, put the next updated date in there.
So, I mean, I think in principle, I agree with you. There needs to be some kind of early alert that a change is coming, as well as the fact that it changes. But it still just brings us back to this basic problem about, whether people, even if you automate that and put it in here, and I do think that it should be there, we really do need to migrate people to dealing with it in an automated way. And that really is a bigger problem for us. We do want to have that feature. But, how do we move the community to doing it in that way is kind of the issue. But
yeah, the only way I could see that working is kind of the way that the launch phase policy extension was done, where you're like segmenting it out to allow for multiple by dates. And that gets a lot more complex. I got to tell you, by implementing this, yes, it's data driven, but in essence, you have to like restructure your data to be by schedule. So in essence, when you're going to schedule your deployment of your new logic, you're going to have to like load it up. I'm saying it's technically feasible. You could do it. It's definitely much more complex to produce and to consume.
5 minutes.
Thank you. Yeah, I was thinking similar lines, Jim, that it
Which Jim?
yes. No, it seems simple enough that there could be an attribute in here that says, hey, there's a future mapping coming up 90 days from now. It could say on August 1st, there's going to be a new mapping. And then technically the registrar could call in and say, give me the mapping for August 1st. Again, a lot harder, but
Can you actually do that? I don't remember in detail enough can I actually ask for a mapping of a particular date? That would be kind of interesting. I'm not sure that even the spec that you guys had would let you do that, but yeah. Anyway, yeah, it's a good topic for discussion to figure some of this stuff out. I mean, especially since for CCTLDs, I mean, they're sort of individually different. I mean, for us and you guys too, you have GTLDs. A lot of things, especially certain changes have mandated notification periods. So all this stuff has to be sort of tied together into your processes. You got 90 days out, 60 days out, that kind of stuff. There are just issues in making all of this work right.
Hello, this is Ulrich from IS. Are we really talking about to fully automate the running of a EPP client, adapting to different registries, changing to specifications on the fly, kind of automated code generation, whatever, to do this? Is that the goal? So a client would, like deploy a new style of connecting whatever without going through testing, just by getting the new definition online?
So this is Jim Galvin, and I'll give you my partial answer to that. Others may have a different point of view, in fairness. What I imagine this registry mapping encompassing is all standard extensions. And yes, a standard registry plus extensions that are known and documented and standardized. The reality is there are registries which are going to not map right onto this thing. They'll be different for whatever reason. There'll be things which are unique to them which won't necessarily be standardized, that kind of thing. So, I mean, all of that applies. What I do imagine is that, at least for us, when we have a new service that we're launching, you always have to go through testing, or you have to go through pre-delegation testing. So not pre-delegation testing. You do have to go to OT&E. It's the right thing. That's pre-delegation.
You have to go through pre-delegation testing
Yeah.
at IIS. That's a different story.
Right. But I think as the other Jim, I'll be the Jim, he can be the other Jim, said, you can imagine these things being available in OT&E first, so that registrars can connect and do their thing and do their own testing, and then they can make their appointments for being accredited for doing things. The ability of a registrar to do anything that's in a mapping is dependent on the registrar having been accredited to do that. And so that's a separate check that the registry has to do on its side. Even if you see the whole thing, you may not be able to do things. So there's still some steps in there. It's not fully automated because there are some particular decision points that have to be made that are outside the scope of the mapping. I don't know if that helps or not. And now we'll let I'll be the other Jim, and he can be the Jim.
No, but because what I think is, if we're talking about now, what you say is, okay, we will have this OT&E system where we do it all first. Then we don't have, we can reduce the complexity in the extension, because we're not expecting it to fully automated work. Well, we're actually expecting that there is the system aware of the changes coming. So, I mean, that makes it a lot easier in terms of definition what we want to do. What we're saying is we have an OT&E, we put in the new things, we have the client connecting, see that it does the right thing, and then the actual extension on the production system will somehow tell them, okay, now we change, today at this point in time, we're changing to the new thing, but the system is already aware of it because it's gone through testing. So
hold on. Put it this way, like I said, we currently use this today in our monitors. So in essence, our monitors have to react based on what's going on in the registry, and based on changes in phases, changes in policy. So in essence, yeah, in a perfect world, yes, you would auto-configure the whole thing and be able to react based on changes. And if you're saying that you need to be able to certify that on the client side before that change occurs, well, that's what the other Jim said. That's why you do have a separate environment to be able to do that kind of testing. So at least you're getting a notice you have an environment to go to test it out beforehand before the change actually does occur, right? Yeah. So.
Yeah, I guess the only closing comment that I would make is, at least from our point of view, the intent is to automate things to the greatest extent possible, but there are some manual decision points that have to happen along the way in this. And that's just because some of this is based on contracts, you know. I mean, making extensions, you need approvals, got to be accredited, all that stuff. And that's outside the scope of automation. So there are limits, but we'd certainly like to automate it, as you said, to the greatest extent possible.
Okay.
And yeah, and the time check is we are now at the end of our hour. So I'll give you a moment to.
Yeah, I was just going to say yes. Now the work's out of time. Good discussion today. Again, I think that the reason we brought this and continued, I think we tried once before to bring this forward, is we do want the group working on. We do want these questions. You know, we want to say, oh yeah, but what about this? You know, can we build for that or not? And how automated can we make those things? You know, from, again, earlier mentioned, for GoDaddy, this will be great because, you know, we'll put the resources to automating this. We do have to make considerations for the other registrars that don't have the ability to adapt to this. So we can't say, yes, you know, you're going to configure your system by reading this. Well, you know, a few registrars may, and you still have that manual process for other registrars as well. So I'll turn it back over to the Jim.
All right, thanks very much. So the blue sheets are up here. If you haven't signed a blue sheet, please come up and do that. And we will see everybody on Wednesday. And I should know off the top of my head when the meeting is on Wednesday, but I actually don't. But it is one of these late afternoon meetings again, too. But we have a 90-minute time slot at that time. And so we'll have a more formal, structured working group meeting then with some discussion. So other than that, thanks very much, everyone. See you on Wednesday.
They all ask to see if this can be adopted into the group.
Yes,
That
absolutely.
makes sense.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, it does. Yes, it does. We should adopt the work item.